Welcome to another book review. And do I have a real rock kicker? Today I am reviewing The Face of Battle by John Keegan. Here are the details of the edition I am reviewing. An historian pretends to be a common soldier. This is John Keegan's troubled legacy. A civilian is by definition a person devoid of military service. A civilian is a person who by definition flees for safety before the face of battle. For a person, let alone an historian, to turn away in said manner and then claim to have seen the face of battle is nothing short of astounding, and such a claim should be treated with extreme skepticism, if not outright derision, by anyone who is trained and prepared to face actual battle. The problems with the book begin on the cover, and no, I'm not referring to any of the nice pictures on any of the various editions. I am referring to the endorsement by a novelist named C.P. Snow on my 1978 Penguin edition. I quote, "The most brilliant evocation of military experience in our time." I had to look up what that word evocate meant. Funnily enough, one synonym for evocate is to imagine, and in a nutshell that is what this book is, a civilian imagining about the military. I can assure you there are no references to Keegan's implied source of apparent divine inspiration. The book is a wild pontification of the worst order. Untethered from any professional or personal connection to actually facing battle, Keegan, nothing more than an alluding academic, takes rein and lets his imagination run free. Keegan chooses to look at just 3 battles before asserting a general conclusion about all, that's all with a capital A, battle. Even the novelist C.P. Snow could see the elephant in the room and was generous enough to make his remark on the work a backhanded compliment. The placing of the quote on the cover no more than a vainglorious attempt by the publisher to ward off anyone with a vested interest in knowing the real face of battle. C.P. Snow may respect soldiers, but John Keegan most certainly does not. The book really is a fool's errand. All it can be is a novel concept, given John Keegan's credentials. Stated more philosophically, the book is strictly attributive and in no way grounded in empirical research. Keegan, like so many after him, has subverted proper evidence-based judgmental history for novel, almost lawyerly allusions. Thus, the face of battle is nothing more than a faint reflection of Homer's shining Achilles. Keegan fights myth with myth, and no military reader is the wiser for it. The actual benefactors from this book are those whose business it is to write mythologies. Sadly, many modern so-called historians see this as their job description. With such liberal artsy writers, operational details and real-world events transmogrify into mere fodder for the explication or exculpation of a chosen subject's character of morality, a sort of double-double toil and trouble. Such reductionism serves no other purpose. Keegan is, absurd as it sounds, placing his shoddy, unperceptive scarecrow of a construct he calls the face of battle on trial. This despite the fact the military paid his bills. There is a name for this behavior: gaslighting. Myth-making historians write what they write because they yearn to be high courtiers in the halls of government, whispering into the minister's ear. By contrast, a soldier is interested in preparing for battle, not preparing for court. This basic fact eludes Keegan. Keegan's professorship at Sandhurst has leased this book an undeserved and otherwise disingenuous legitimacy. Modern myth-writing historians are all too happy to hide behind Keegan's shield of legitimacy, the shield itself gained strictly by his professorship at Sandhurst. This book makes painfully clear how little Keegan allowed himself to learn from his military peers at Sandhurst. The biggest fault of the book is its fundamental lack of historiographic methodology. Rather than do his legwork, Keegan instead chooses disingenuously to invoke S.L.A. Marshall. However, Keegan only does so after he has already piquantly rejected Marshall's historiographic method. What method Keegan proposes to use instead he leaves unsaid, and that is all beside the fact Keegan still uses maps with unintelligible boxes to illustrate his case studies. As a military reader, this manipulation confuses me quite deeply, and this is in the first chapter. There's nothing Keegan can do past this point that will free himself from his decision to introduce his magnum opus with the manipulator's gaslight. If this book were a lecture, I would have left around page 21. To the best of my own recollection, This is about where I abandoned the book while attempting to read it during my active duty service. After all, what's the use in reading a book that denies your entire profession whilst cloaking itself in your uniform? This is my recommendation to active duty soldiers. Don't waste your time. You don't even need to finish this review. Go read If You Survive by George Wilson instead. The question I still have is this. What does Keegan himself bring to the military discussion that has not already been said by the participants? The best a civilian writer can add to such accounts is a bit of priestly gravitas, and more often than not, such writers add more than a little novelistic flair and flourish. Not the sort of thing you should be reading while on active duty. It's important to keep in mind that Keegan is neither giving a sermon nor presenting a novel. He is, in theory, writing history. However, as a soldier, I assert that Keegan is not writing history. He is writing something much more sinister. So what is Keegan actually doing? He is, in a rather novel way, subverting S.L.A. Marshall's historiographic methods. Instead of building a sand table of the complete battle based on the testimony of all the surviving participants, aerial and combat photos, radio logs and transcriptions, headquarters maps, and maps carried by the leaders in the field, captured enemy documents, etc., etc. No. Keegan does the exact opposite. He finds a few juicy anecdotes that fit his rabid imaginings, and it only gets worse from there. The fact Keegan chooses battles where it's impossible for him to use properly S.L.A. Marshall's historiographic methods does not absolve him of the academic responsibility inherent in the invoking of his name and his method. This isn't just gaslighting, this is academic malfeasance. Why did Keegan choose the battles he did? I suspect he chose the battles on the continent closest to Britain, probably with half a mind for Sandhurst to organize a single, long weekend staff ride over the 3 chosen battlefields. Then again, he might have had other reasons. Keegan never makes clear what makes these 3 battles battles, and therefore representative of all battle. No principle, no conjecture, or assertion is distilled from any of his case studies. Keegan only seems to care that the British won in the end. This should be no surprise to anyone. Keegan's unremitting refrain, smoke and noise, suggests to me that he is hung up on the prosaic sensory remarks that feature in all memoirs. Sadly, these inconsequential elements are all that make up Keegan's scarecrow. Keegan even paints a nasty face on the straw, calling the Duke of Wellington's understanding of the Battle of Waterloo, quote, distorted. Keegan's choice of battles couldn't have had anything to do with staff rides. Keegan, like all alluding academics, tweaks the historical allusions and conventional myths about battle, all without saying anything about the art of soldiering itself. That is to say, Keegan constructs his own historical illusion with novelizations of other people's memories. Memory, of course, is not without its faults, and Keegan, in direct contravention of Marshall's historiographic methods, imagines, dramatizes, and exaggerates situations into his mythical straw-like construction, never attempting to find the truth behind the memories he does cite. But Keegan is not done stirring just yet. Fire burn and cauldron bubble. Keegan, with his disingenuous talk of knowing the common soldier, pushes a deeply distorted view of single combat. Keegan, oddly given his opening statements, draws his definition of single combat from the very historical illusions which he claims to be tearing down. Why does Keegan not define either a pragmatic or a practical definition of single combat? I think the answer is obvious. Keegan's definition of single combat underpins his entire argument. To remove this pin is to collapse the argument under its own academic weight. Keegan's failure to be pragmatic and therefore open to complexity about the idea of single combat leads his illusion far, far astray. Keegan's stuffy idea of battle seemingly condoning the unlawful conduct of British soldiers in his case studies. Keegan admits the conduct was unlawful, then proceeds to wave his hands. In my American military mind, this is the sinister purpose behind this book. A civilian historian, unknown to himself, wistfully pines for a time when such unlawful conduct by soldiers was common practice. That is why I absolutely despise certain civilian military historians like Keegan and the seeming multitudes of myth-believing YouTubers who dare to lecture about subject of which they have absolutely no knowledge. Keegan thus, with manipulator's purpose, defines poorly his scope of inquiry and therefore leaves himself no other contingency but to refute his own twisted view of battle at his argument's conclusion. Keegan, by giving the common soldier no intellectual quarter, has left himself no quarter. By definition, battle By defining battle as something no modern soldier can participate in, Keegan has, in his own mind, freed himself from the burden of extinguishing his gaslight. Sadly for the rest of us actual soldiers, the damage is already done. Keegan is a charlatan and a pretender, and by the final chapter, even Keegan has dispensed with his original pretense. Keegan, in no uncertain terms, becomes openly hostile towards active duty personnel. The concluding chapter, even in the context of the Pimpmobile 70s, is laughable. The coherent rant of the first chapter has morphed into a nasty diatribe. Keegan demonstrates his genuine lack of knowledge, empathy, or even basic understanding of his subject matter, the experience of the common soldier. Keegan asserts, both disingenuously and with zero evidence, that the Archer of Agincourt, quote, exercised a greater range and depth of skills than the modern rifleman. The statement shows the myth-making historian's dark and sinister purpose. They always, without fail, sell out, browbeat, insinuate, and above all condemn the current generation of soldiers. I cannot emphasize this enough. This gaslight behavior is the bread and butter of the pulp myth military historian. The current serving soldiers are never good enough, never athletic enough, never technically competent enough for this ilk of so-called historian. To these myth-makers, soldiers are not human. Soldiers to the pulp writers are either semi-divine or they are dead. Guess which Keegan chose for this book? It is as if Keegan wrote this book while reading The Lord of the Rings. Instead of understanding the common soldier, Keegan asserts his position as a military historian to say whatever he likes about whatever battle or set of battles that catches his fancy. Counterintuitively, there is perhaps more than a grain of truth to this assertion. However, and sadly, Keegan can no longer answer for why he felt the need to camouflage his assertion with such nasty alacrity. Why did Keegan need to pretend to be a soldier? Why couldn't he just admit to himself, and thus to everyone, that soldiers fight the battles and historians declare the victories? This book, The Face of Battle, is the gaslight that caused the so-called civil-military divide in the West. Here are my recommendations. If you are a soldier or veteran, there's a lot to dislike in this book. I don't recommend reading it unless you are interested in the so-called civil-military divide. Otherwise, this book is for the birds. And that's all we've got time for today. This has been an independent production for YouTube by Goblin, April 2022. All rights reserved. I hope this was useful.